Yeah, welcome to the Making of Me podcast. Today we have our Sean Quinlan, a Peninsula criminal defense attorney with 25 years of experience on both sides of the courtroom. Sean share real insight from prosecuting and defending cases ranging from homicide to DUI, showing how early decisions shape outcome and what people really need to know about the criminal justice system.
Pleasure to be here. I'm happy to join you today.
Yeah, thank you. So, Shan, in one sentence, what challenge shaped you into who you are today?
One big professional challenge was realizing the power of the state and the power of the state versus the power of the accused or the average citizen in any given society. Having been a part of a DA's office prosecuting for a state licensing bureau, you get a very distinct sense of the power of government and the disproportionate power that they wield over the average person that they are to be functionally tasked with protecting. But the disparity of power between the two parties is monumental. And having been on both sides, the personal reward that you get from helping the people that are in trouble with the law and in trouble with the government is incomparable. It's almost a perfect inverse
Yeah.
relationship between the power that the government has over people and the reward that you get from helping those people.
Wow, wow, amazing, amazing. So, how did our living persecution to become a defender impact your perspective on justice?
It's very difficult, at least it was difficult for me, because as an American, when you leave a government job, you leave your health insurance. You leave a salary and you leave your health insurance. So you're functionally pushing yourself out into the cold. And you're trusting that the people that you hope will hire you will pay you sufficiently to help them to sustain you. It's terrifying. It's a very difficult thing for someone to do, to leave working for the government and to come out into the cold and be on your own and try to help people. It's not an easy task.
Wow, that's amazing. So, what is the biggest misconception people have about criminal defense?
The biggest misconception people have is that they'll never get in trouble,
Mm,
and that this is the kind of thing that happens to other people, and that this is the kind of thing that will never touch them. It's like kind of like medicine. You're never going to be the person that gets a cancer diagnosis. You're never going to be the person that has an injury. You just feel like it will always be the way it's always been, and therefore you will be perpetually healthy and young and vibrant, and you will be perpetually free of the intervention of the state into your life. And I think that's a misconception that a lot of people hold, is that this is not my problem because I never get in trouble and I don't live a lifestyle that will lead me to be in
mm,
trouble.
wow. The moment you just make reference of those misconceptions, I just feel guilty that, yeah, I'm part of those who actually think that way too. But I'm
It,
glad we're having this conversation. So, how do early persecution decisions influence case outcome?
the police in the field, they hire a certain kind of person to do that job. And typically, the person that they hire to do the job as a police officer is a very black and white thinker. They're not hired to be a nuanced gray area trying to explain the situation. They are hired to be soldiers for the law. And they are not interested in nuance. They are not
Yeah,
interested in an alternative explanation. They are not interested in trying to find perhaps maybe there's something that you're not seeing and therefore this should not be prosecuted. They then in turn take those facts as they perceive them and hand them to a prosecutor. Now, everything I'm saying is in the context of a first world country where the
yeah,
rule of law governs, where you understand that in the future this is just the first step, and down the road you're going to be in a courtroom with a judge, a prosecutor, and arguably your own defense attorney. This is not always the case, and it's not always the case even here in the United States, where as we're seeing with the ICE deportations. Whereas we could count on people being brought before a judge and having a decision made as to why they're here, where their papers are, how long they've been here, their role in our society, etc. So even here in the United States now, we're seeing an erosion of the rule of law and the ability to see in the future, even after your initial meeting with the police, that you're going to get a fair trial, a fair hearing with someone that's there to represent you and explain your side of the story. So just to come back to your original question, it's the very groundwork for the first initial decisions on a prosecution are with the officer, typically in the field.
yeah. Amazing, amazing. Thanks for that. So, what should people do about DUI stop and roadside?
Well, there's a few things I'd like to tell people. The first is don't argue with the police, and then the second thing is you want to be if you're able, and this is kind of a tricky thing, because if we're dealing with an impairment case, it's hard to explain to someone what their rates are while they're not impaired and have them recall those things when they are impaired, arguably. But there's two things that are going to happen here in Pennsylvania anyway. You have an officer who's going to see signs of intoxication, glassy bloodshot eyes, slurred speech, difficulty finding paperwork, etc. And they're going to use that as a basis to get you out of the car, to ask you
Yeah.
to do field sobriety tests. The field sobriety tests are extremely subjective and highly arbitrary. And what I mean by that is there are people who can perform them very easily. If you're a gymnastics person or a soccer
Yeah.
player, you have no difficulty navigating these field sobriety tests. But if you're anyone else, or if you have a pain in your foot or your knee or your hip, or you haven't slept in 2 days, you're going to perform very poorly on those tests. Consequently, the Constitution and the law here in Pennsylvania will allow you to refuse those standard field sobriety tests. However, if the officer has deemed that there's enough probable cause to bring you in for a blood draw, if you refuse the blood draw here in Pennsylvania, now your driver's license is automatically suspended for at least 12 months. So you
Ouch.
can refuse both, but if you refuse the second one, you're looking at a mandatory suspension of your driver's license. Therefore, I generally will tell people, don't do that. Don't refuse the blood test, because there is an instant consequence to which there's almost no recourse. If you refuse the blood draw, PennDOT will suspend your license. PennDOT is the driver's license licensing authority here in Pennsylvania, responsible for giving you your driver's license.
Wow, that's a whole lot, and just learning this is, yeah, it's a whole lot of just to remove the burdens of falling victim. So how do constitutional rights like search and seize or play out in a real cases?
Well, that's one of the ways. So typically, you're going to have a reasonable suspicion for the stop, which is these are all constitutionally decided, not necessarily in the Constitution itself, but by the Supreme Court and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which is interpreting the laws and based on our constitutional rights, typically the Fourth Amendment, what constitutes a reasonable suspicion for pulling someone over. As they pull someone over for speeding or a burned out taillight or going through a red light, they can then formulate something for probable cause. And probable cause would be that a crime has been committed. So if it's just a summary citation, a traffic violation, you don't need any of this. You saw them speeding, therefore you just issue them a citation and off they go. Even then, though, you're still entitled to a hearing. If you enter a not guilty plea, you can get a hearing on that. However, it escalates to the next step. The reasonable suspicion escalates when you're going to accuse them of a crime. And there's crimes under Title 75, which is the traffic code, and there's crimes under Title 18, which is the criminal code, and that's here in Pennsylvania. In either case, you need probable cause to bring the person in or bring them up on charges, and that will be ultimately determined down the road. So your attorney can say, they did not have probable cause to arrest this person. A district justice can say, yes, I agree, therefore we're going to dismiss this case at a probable cause hearing. Essentially, when your first hearing is held here in Pennsylvania, it's going to be your preliminary hearing. And that determination is made, was a crime committed, and is the person that committed that crime likely this person that's before the court? It's a very low standard.
Yeah.
However, it is kind of a similar probable cause standard. Did they likely do it? At the next level, and this is all pursuant to Pennsylvania law as interpreted through the Supreme Court, at the next level would be your actual guilt or innocence determination. And you can do that. That would be at a regular court, either by a judge or a jury of your peers. Here in Pennsylvania, that would be 12 people. And this is, these are different offenses have different rights. So say, for example, here in Pennsylvania, if the criminal offense does not carry a maximum term of incarceration more than 6 months, you're only entitled to a trial by a judge. If the maximum period of incarceration is more than 6 months, then you're entitled to a jury of 12 people. And that's, here again, we leave the standard of proof at probable cause at the lower level. Now we're at the burden of proof is beyond reasonable doubt. And most people, most cases, at least 90%, resolve at that level by way of a guilty plea, where you just stipulate, yes, I did this thing. And very often that guilty plea will not be to the thing that you originally charged with. It will be a
Yeah.
lesser offense. So before we have a felony offense, now we're going to plead down to something lesser. And arguably that's because the docket is so full, there's so many files, there's so many cases, that they're looking to resolve these matters quickly and expeditiously. And if that's in the best interest of both parties, specifically in my case, my defendant, my client, that is something that we will have to seriously explore, whether or not they're making us an offer that we want to entertain, even regardless of guilt or innocence.
Yeah, amazing. This is really amazing and a whole lot of enlightenment here. So, why do so many defenses cases still result in guilty pleas?
And this gets back to our original question, because when you're sitting in front of a jury, Many jurisdictions will find that the police have a higher trustworthy nature. So if you have a uniformed police officer with a badge and a gun and a lengthy history of doing that job, juries are typically very sympathetic to whatever they have to say. It's the same thing for teachers,
Yeah.
nurses. They're just trustworthy professions. And because of TV indoctrination or just family members who are in law enforcement, or they just have a bias towards believing and trusting law enforcement, they will do so. Consequently, you have a right to not testify against yourself under the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution. And even if you were to testify, you are the accused, and therefore whatever you say is going to be discounted because you're trying to get yourself out of trouble. The officer, on the other hand, has the same job. They're trying to prove their case. However, juries have a bias that they just trust with what the prosecution and the police officer has to say. Therefore, it is usually in your best interest to very carefully outweigh whether or not you have the ability to discount, discredit, or disprove what it is that the officer is saying.
Wow. Amazing, amazing. So what advice will you give someone facing criminal charges for the first time?
Well, it depends on the nature of the offense. It is possible to get cases dismissed. It is possible to file a motion to suppress evidence and have the case dismissed that way. It is possible to seek an alternative resolution. So there are different ways that the prosecution deems a first-time offender not really deserving of the full brunt force of the law, therefore will entertain an alternative resolution whereby they can do functionally some term of probation, some classes, for example, repayment of restitution, and then the case will be dismissed and the record will be expunged. If we can explore that option, we're going to discuss that at length. And this is kind of a damage control progression. So first, can we get it dismissed at the preliminary hearing because of a failure to have sufficient evidence? Failing that, can we take it to the next level? When we take it to the next level, can we turn it into something that isn't as onerous? Or say, for example, we go from a misdemeanor to a summary, and we plead to a summary offense, and now we're out the door with a $300 fine, and no big deal. If, however, they will not come down to a summary offense, then we are forced to decide, do we want to go to trial? Do we want to enter a guilty plea, or do we want to try to explore an alternative resolution? If you've got any kind of criminal record that you've been before the courts before, that is not going to be an option. Therefore, now we're back to damage control. And then let's assume, for example, that we can't plea it away. Then the DA has at their disposal the ability to negotiate on incarceration. Are you going to jail? If so, for how long? All of these things are going to go into the decision as to whether or not we want to plead guilty to the offense. If they say, look, we're just seeking probation. If we go from jail to probation, okay, that's better. If we go from a long probationary period of, say, 5 years down to 2 years, okay, that's better. Are we talking about reporting probation where we're constantly in contact with a probation officer? Are we talking about house arrest with an electronic monitor? These are all variables that go into the decision as to whether or not we want to enter a guilty plea.
Wow, this is really amazing. Yeah, a whole lot to actually learn here. Especially, I think it makes me more interested as a victim. And the fact that you debunked it just make me more interested in every of the particular insight that we give you. That it has really, really, really been lovely. Yeah, getting to hear this from you is very amazing. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So, how has criminal persecution changed over the past 80 years?
As an American, the thing that I've noticed over the course of my career in the past 25 years, and
Yeah.
probably longer than that, there is a political reward for a phrase called tough on crime. And the phrase tough on crime is extremely convenient for people who are already in power that are seeking higher power, higher office. So a common pathway for an American politician is to be a DA, be a prosecuting attorney, and then turn around and parlay that into higher office. And the way they do that is by arresting and prosecuting the lower levels, lower income, the less fortunate people in the community, and prosecuting the heck out of them and seeking very high punitive arrangements. So, for example, they'll seek a death penalty on a homicide case, or they'll seek lengthy terms of incarceration, whereas they wouldn't in an off-election year. And they're rewarded for this because the press will follow that case. And this is a phenomenon all over the United States. There's no state in the country where this isn't the way it goes. Very often you'll see a DA become a mayor, become a governor, and then be a candidate for the president. It's a very common path. DA to something, to something, to something, all based on their ability to prosecute the crap out of people who are otherwise without the means to defend themselves. And we even saw it with Kamala Harris, who started out as a prosecutor. in California, in San Francisco. And it's all over. It's a constant, very common path. And the result of that is we have a criminal prosecution industrial complex. And by that I mean we have these massive prisons and massive prison system. There are more people in the American prison system than in any country in the history of the world and all other countries on planet Earth right now combined. So we're looking at almost 3 million people incarcerated right now in the United States. Just here in Pennsylvania, the population, and this is the only way I can remember this, is because the nationwide prison population is about that of Philadelphia, the city of Philadelphia, and the Pennsylvania prison population is approximately the size of the city that I live close to, Harrisburg. And it's a massive industry keeping these people housed, clothed, fed, supervised, and it carries with it an attendant cost on par with that of a higher education. So it's about $45,000 a year to go to a Pennsylvania college, and it's about $45,000 a year to incarcerate a person for 12 months, which is, if we had the circumspection to institute actual legitimate reform, we would follow something closer to a European model and not reward politicians for being quote unquote tough on crime at the expense of schools, roads, infrastructure, social services. There's myriad ways that we are throwing money needlessly at something that isn't calling for it.
Yeah.
Put it that way.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sean. That's really been an amazing section. What will be your final words to my audience there who still have the same misconception about our criminal cases that they can be a victim? What will be your final words today?
My final words would be, and I have no book to sell. I have no website to promote. I have nothing to do here. No link, no subscription. My final thought is, as I very often run in the morning, and I was running in the morning this morning in the dark at 5:30 this morning. And I have a bias towards my fellow man. And I would encourage people to, if they hear that someone has a criminal record, not be so keen to have judged them for something you know nothing about. And that maybe they did enter a guilty plea because there were circumstances beyond their control to which they had to stand at a microphone in an open courtroom with the advice of counsel and plead to something because it was the most expeditious way to move on with their life. And you are surrounded by normal people who have been caught and ensnared in a system to which they have no other way to get out of than to take this path. And I would just encourage all of us to be gentle with one another and hope for the same for you should the time come, that you will be surrounded by people who understand that what's happening to their neighbor could well happen to them, and to just be circumspect about that prospect.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sean. So, Sean, for my audience who wants to learn more from you, who want to connect with you, either on various media, how can they reach out to you?
Good question. I do have a website, but it's only for my local practice, and it's here in Pennsylvania, and it's pretty much only going to be of service to you if you live in that local Pennsylvania area.
Yeah.
So PennsylvaniaDUI.attorney, that's about the only way you're going to find me. Or Facebook has a similar QLG LLC, but otherwise there is no Twitter presence, no Blue Sky presence, no Instagram, well, maybe an Instagram presence. If there is, I'm not doing anything with it. But that's about the only way.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sean. It has been an amazing conversation. Thank you for your advice to being that. Yeah, sometimes we just have to do some things to just carry on, and the fact that you just explain using stories all along speak volumes too. Yeah, we should just do better, and it has really been amazing actually, and I love this particular conversation. Thank you so much.
Ara, you're wonderful. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Shan, for sharing your experience and insight. Your story reminds us that justice isn't about law or paper. It's about decision, strategy, and understanding the system. And it has really been an amazing now having this conversation. So if you need his advice or you need the legal stuff at Venezuela or attorney or for practical guidance and criminal defense and rights. Once again, it's really a pleasure having you on the show. Sure.
Thank you, Ara. Appreciate it, buddy.
Yeah, thank you so much.